Please explain your role in the Kansas City, Missouri School District during the years between 1971 and 1997.
Yes, I had several roles during that period of time. In 1971, I was the instrumental music teacher or the band director at Manual High School. And then in 1975, I moved over to Paseo High School and became the band director over there. And then in 1984, I became a school counselor at Nyland Middle School. Now, along the way, I picked up a master's degree in music education from the University of Kansas, and also a counseling degree, a guidance and counseling degree from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. In 1986, I was privileged to be on the interview team or one of the administrators at the Lincoln College Prep school. I was selected to serve in the administration there. I had gotten administrative certification. So we interviewed the entire staff and we opened the Lincoln College Prep school. And so it's still doing very well now, but I was a member of the first administrative team as an assistant principal. Then the next year, I moved over to the Kansas City Middle School of the Arts as the assistant principal there and served there for 1 year as the principal, and then I became the principal there, and I served as principal there through 1996. So I think your study deals with 1971 through 1996, and so those were my areas of responsibility during that period of time. Well, I believe, as I recall, there were some small, minor initiatives. It seems to me that they attempted to have students in independence accept students from various schools in Kansas City to foster integration. But I think the major effort occurred with the desegregation court order. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the establishment of the Lincoln College Prep School was one of the first opportunities for me to be engaged in that. And I'll tell you a little story about that. Went to Lincoln College Prep in 1986. Privileged to be there to serve really outstanding students coming in. I think at that time you had to have a 60th percentile test score to come to the school, so obviously we had really fine students and fine teachers. But while we were working there, I always had an interest in the arts. And so even though I had taught music for many years and had gotten a degree in counseling, I still had that interest. So the school district published a notice saying that they were forming task forces to open magnet schools. And so I was intrigued when the information said that they were going to open a visual and performing arts magnet school. What a great opportunity, I thought. So even though I was in heaven, I guess you would say, because I was at the Lincoln College Prep school, I still had that interest in the arts. And so I then joined the task force to form the Visual and Performing Arts School. And so we met at 1211 homes, once a week or so. And so after completing my duties as one of the assistant principals at Lincoln College Prep, then I would drive down to the Board of Education, and then we would continue our discussions, our dreaming, if you will, about what would it be like to have a school dedicated to the arts, having creative writing and theater and orchestra and band and visual and performance, where you have visual artists, and then in theater, and then theatrical production, and what goes on behind the scenes. We were so excited about that until I was just really fascinated with that. And then, lo and behold, I got a call from one of the superintendents in early spring. And so he indicated that they had researched the current administrators employed by the district, and that I was the only administrator who had a fine arts background. And at that time, the district, in its effort integrating schools. Remember now, the desegregation court order was put forth in order to integrate schools. And so what happened was they had done their research at the central office and discovered that a man by the name of Dr. Thomas Toos was a premier visual and performing arts principal. He had great success at the New Orleans Visual Performing Arts School, and I'll let you know one of the graduates at the New Orleans Visual Performing Arts School was none other than Wynton Marsalis. Well, he was one of Dr. Toos' students. So he went on to St. Louis and had done a job there to establish that school. And so the Kansas City, Missouri School District said, we want this school to be really successful. So I guess they made Dr. Toos an offer he couldn't refuse. So he came over here to Kansas City from St. Louis. And so since I had the only background in visual performing arts, the central office superintendent said, we'd like for you to talk with Dr. Toos. We're not making you any promises. He has free reign to employ who he wants as his assistant. And so it was a new program where they were only going to have 250 students. So I had this meeting with Dr. Toos. I actually remember that it was held on May the 11th. In 1987. And so right away there was a chemistry between Dr. Toos and I. And so I was really hoping after the interview that he would give me a call. And sure enough, a few days later, the superintendent called and said that, well, Dr. Toos wants you to join him. And so I was very excited about that. And then as school ended, then Dr. Toos and I had the responsibility of opening a new school. Now keep in mind now, this is the district's initiative to integrate schools, and magnet schools were established for that purpose. And so Dr. Toos and I interviewed everyone, and we hired everyone, and we had great success. Well, the community had mixed feelings about that. Okay. First of all, some of the community members wondered how would they be affected by this. You know, you're talking about starting a new school. Well, what happens to the school where my child is going? So there were some concerns about that, some apprehension about that. By and large, the community was in, I would say, a stage of being suspicious. How is this going to work? Because there were some people in the community aware of what had happened in other states when school districts used as a strategy for integrating schools, forming magnet schools. And so some of the members were suspicious. Some had a lot of excitement because people recognize that in these schools that are designed to integrate, then students that have not had equal opportunities or equal access to educational opportunity will be afforded that privilege now. That's the basis of the Brown versus the Board of Education decision. And so some people who were knowledgeable about what happens when integration occurs were very excited about this. So I think the community had mixed emotions about what this new program to integrate schools would have on their life going forward. You know, I actually believe that it depended on where you worked. If you were in one of the schools that was considered a successful school, and the Kansas City, Missouri School District has always had pockets of educational excellence. Always. Certain schools would really be considered outstanding. High schools with students that were national merit scholars, and students that would go to district music contests and get first ratings, and students that would compete statewide in debate programs, and they would win. They would win everything. Now, the administrators and faculties in those schools and staff, they were a little reluctant and a little resentful about what a magnet program would really mean. I remember a conversation that I had with one of those instructors that worked in one of those schools, a school that would have be considered an outstanding school. And he termed the magnet schools as maggot schools. He wasn't happy about that because he knew that his world could come to an end. But for some of us who worked in the schools that the facilities were in disrepair, in situations where we didn't have a lot of parental involvement. So let's go back. Those schools where we had those pocket of excellence schools, they usually had a lot of parent participation. They usually had influential parents who could speak to the Muriel Kaufmans and the folk in the community that could make substantial contributions to their programs. And they could experiment with all of these outstanding initiatives, and the students would be benefited. Those programs, those schools, the people there, I think, were a little hesitant about embracing it. But the schools that were the have-not schools, there's a program now on TV called The Haves and the Have-Nots. The have-nots people really did like this. So there were mixed emotions in the community about what this could possibly mean for Kansas City schools. You know, many students are really concerned with their friends. Their friends. Will their friends choose to go to some of these magnet schools, these experiments, or will they stay in this school? So they also had mixed emotions, but I'm not so sure that most of the students had a lot of information, although the district provided information regarding this new initiative to integrate schools, to desegregate schools. I think it's a term that was used then. But I'm not so sure that that was foremost in the minds of the students. They wondered about it, but probably were more concerned about the styles and, you know, the conversations and the latest record and so forth. So I'm not so sure that it was as significant in the lives of most of the students. Now, some of the students that were coming from families that had discussions around the table about what these new educational opportunities could provide, they probably had more information and they probably had more opinions about this whole proposition. So students were, some were happy, some maybe were not so happy. Well, from 1991 until 1986, I worked in a segregated school. All the schools where I worked, there were very few students of different races. The students that I served, and I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to work with those students, they were students that looked like me. In 1986, I was privileged to go to Nyland Junior High School at that time. That school was a member of the Kansas City, Missouri School District at that time, and that was really my first exposure to working in an integrated setting. And so my experiences changed. So then by going to an integrated setting, then I gave people of other races an opportunity to see a person who was hardworking, a person who was committed to excellence, a person who cared about kids of all races. So I think, first of all, that was a big contributor in terms of the role model that I set for people to observe my work. Well, in 1986 is when I really had some involvement with integration. And at that time, I was an assistant principal. And so my greatest roles from 86 until 96 really dealt with, as a school administrator, attempting to select faculty and staff that would be able to enhance the education of all of the students. Then also working with students in ways that would help them have a greater appreciation for working in an integrated environment. Again, the school district did have its pockets of excellence. We had some elementary schools that were just really dynamic, outstanding. We had, at that time, they called them junior high schools. They also were outstanding. And we had some high schools that were, that were really outstanding as well. But the vast majority of the schools were not schools that that were having a great deal of success. So those half schools had really distinguished educational and academic outcomes, several national merit scholars. Their test results were exceptional. And I think, though, that the idea of desegregation came about as a response to how can we raise the academic achievement of our students as measured by standardized tests to the extent that a greater population of our students will have the same kind of exposure. And so there was this push to move away from the idea of just having these pockets of excellence in the school district. So as I said, there were significant academic strides made during those years, but I think the decision by the district was that there weren't enough students having those kind of experiences. I would like to say that we had some really wonderful experiences at the Kansas City Middle School of the Arts, where I had the privilege of serving as principal for 9 years. And during that time, we had students that would win national contests. We would every year have outstanding students in the creative writing contest. We would win the largest majority of the local arts contests. But our test scores also were very good. And we would compete with the Lincoln College Prep every year, although we didn't have an entrance requirement that was attached to academics. For example, as I mentioned at the Lincoln College Prep, when I had the privilege of serving there, students were only admitted with a 60 percentile or above test score. Our school didn't have that. We took the students that were interested in the arts. And so that was a wonderful experience. But we had congressmen coming to our school to talk to our students in our social studies classes. And of course, we had these exchanges with the symphony, Kansas City Symphony. They played at our school. We had our students that would have an opportunity to work with them. Once we had Fred Shuttleworth. Those civil rights people understand that Fred Shuttleworth and Dr. Martin Luther King and David Garrow's book talks about the relationship that they had. Well, he came and he talked to our students. We had Dr. Martin Luther King's daughter come to our school and talk about our students. Our students went on all kind of field trips to enhance the arts. And we were all in an integrated environment. students from Independence and Raytown and Grandview, white students, came into the urban core and got a chance, and we got a chance to know the best of each other. And I think that is one of the real goals of integration. That's what we want to do. And so that's what we were doing at the Kansas City Middle School of the Arts.
And what might have been some of the social outcomes for students of school desegregation?
Oh, I tell you, first of all, the opportunity for students to be in an environment where those stereotypes are broken down. See, in our situation where schools have become resegregated, then students go in and they're all Hispanic, or they're all Caucasian, or they're all African American. And so really the only opportunity that you have is to, first of all, get inaccurate information that's passed down, see negative publicity, and so forth. And so you don't have a way of saying, well, you know, this is not true, or this is not accurate. But in an integrated environment, the kind that we had at the Kansas City Middle School of the Arts, you might see a black man running from the police, or robbing a store or something like that. Then the next day you come back to school and you're sitting next to a student, or there's a discussion that's being conducted about it, and then you get to see that, you know, all African American students are not this way. Then you can look at TV and you can see a Dylan Roof walk into the Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, and kill 9 black people at a Bible study. And then you say, well, and you get to have these conversations with a Caucasian, and you say, well, this man was a racist, but all white people are not racist. And so integration gives an opportunity for you to have a better understanding of people. And that's why, in my view, it's a very important way of integrating, of educating students.
And in what ways might school integration have shaped Kansas City communities?
Well, first of all, I'm not so sure that integration per se can shape Kansas City communities. I think people live in communities based on the amount of money that they make. It's the class of people that they want to be around. If you have people that are very successful and have incomes, then they usually want to live in an area where there's nice housing, nice amenities. There are areas of Kansas City where you have that, but I think the greatest benefit of an integrated setting and the impact it could have in Kansas City is that maybe people that are living in Kansas City might not be so reluctant when they're walking down the street in the evening and they see a black person. Then they might say, well, you know, maybe this person is not about to rob me, or, you know, for example, they may feel they might not be so nervous about going to 18th and Vine. You know, there's an effort there to renovate the 18th and Vine district. Well, they might say, well, you know, I feel that I can go there because I think that that's a safe place. So I think I'm not so sure that the integration per se could affect the communities. It's the income, I think, that affects where people live, or it could affect the attitudes that people have that live in those communities. I really like the idea of a strong focus on early childhood education. And I mean more than just giving lip service, you know. I mean putting money there. I mean paying the kind of salaries that attract the best and brightest to want to work with early childhood education. Then I also think, though, that it's very important that when a child is born, that we have some record of it, particularly in urban areas. And then we start tracking that child's family. And then the school districts are trying to meet those parents very early on to see if they can help that family with their readiness. I was privileged to serve as a principal for 25 years. I learned a whole lot in 25 years working as a high school principal, a middle school principal, and an elementary principal. And one of the things that I learned is with parental involvement and resources that can help parents parent, those have a tremendous impact on the education of students as measured by standardized test scores. So the early emphasis on childhood education, getting those parents involved in programs, giving them assistance. I can remember some situations where I would have a teacher that would come to me. In this case, this was an after-school program. And the gentleman came in and said that he was having some difficulty because one of the young women was making advances, and he wanted me to know that he had nothing to do with that, and he didn't encourage that, and he wanted to report it. This child was 13 years old. Okay, well, I immediately called the mother, and I invited her to come in for a conference. And during the course of the conference, the mother revealed to me that she had become the mother of this child when she was 13. Well, now, if we can have a strong emphasis in identifying families and working with parents and working with families, then in all probability, these students will be ready for education. I think one of the significant problems that we have in urban education is that many of our students that come to school in kindergarten, they are just not really ready for education. They're good kids, but their parents have been so busy just making a living until they haven't had an opportunity to provide the kind of counseling and guidance that would have students ready for school. This emphasis on early education, hopefully, would be able to help that. This is not a judgmental statement. I'm meant to be critical of anyone. So let me set the record straight on that. I'm not trying to be critical of, I'm just talking about what strategies can we put in place to realities that we face. I know I faced them as a principal. So the reality is, what can we do? That focus on early childhood education is providing those resources. And it's sort of like making school kind of like the hub of the community. You can get health care there. You can, if you want to find out about something about that would help you with weatherizing your home. All of those kind of, so the school then is seen as the beacon on the hill, if you will. And so then we tear down this war that we have sometimes with school and community. We want the community to say, well, we can come into these programs. And I think to get there, one of the things that we need to do is have robust programs of diversity. That's just a statistic that says that over 92% of students that work in schools now, their teachers are Caucasian. And there's also data to show that the number of African Americans going into education is in decline. So what does that say over the long term? It says that people like Roger Williams, I'm a dinosaur. You don't see black men in education. You might see them as a principal, but as a third grade teacher, as a kindergarten teacher, where are the black men? Where are the black women? And then there's an unwritten message that's being sent out there. That unwritten message is that, well, maybe black people don't do anything in education, or the students don't get to see those positive examples early of all races. I think that's important if we want to break down some of the stereotypes that we face every day. Well, I want to say that I have read a lot of the negative accounts of the progress of the magnet schools. And you can Google information that talks about how the Kansas City, Missouri public schools desegregation plan was a failure. And the next thing you can see is that there was too much money put into education. Well, I disagree with that from the standpoint of, yes, the program was flawed, but I also believe that there were many benefits that came from that program. In that program, the current Democratic presumptive nominee came to one of those kind of programs. And that child and her family will remember that because Mrs. Clinton sent pictures. Okay, I see that as a positive advantage. So when you just lump that all in and say that the program was a failure, I disagree with that. The next point that I disagree with is about we just wasted our money. I think people didn't look at the politics of it. A lot of the taxpayers' money was going to support those magnet schools and building those wonderful facilities. I was so privileged to work in a $20 million facility. I was so happy to sit around the table with the architects as we designed that program. But now the people in rural Missouri, they didn't really think a lot of that. I remember once I was very insensitive. I went to a principals conference and I was sitting next to some principals from rural school districts. And I made the mistake of talking about some of the wonderful experiences that we were exposing our students to as a result of the desegregation plan that their taxpayers were paying. And I offended some of those administrators, and I was very insensitive. But when I got back home, I realized that I probably shouldn't have said that. So the point that I'm trying to get to eventually is that although people talk about money is not the most important thing, I agree that it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is having a great teacher with those students every day, a teacher who has gone beyond the stereotypes. I believe that having a robust diversity program will help us get the best people in the classrooms. But I also think that money is important. Let me give you a most recent example. You have some very fine schools in the Blue Valley School District, excellent schools. Those superintendents were wise enough when the Kansas legislature had to go back because the Kansas Supreme Court said that they had to go back because of the funding. Those superintendents, were wise enough to schedule a press conference because they wanted that money under the new formula. That money afforded more money for their schools. Their schools are already exceptional schools. They were still asking for more money. So when we talk about, well, money is a minor role, I say that we can't discount that. If you look at Harvard University, the greatest, or consider the greatest institution of higher learning in America, don't mean any disrespect for UMKC, but the reality is that if you look at the Harvard Foundation, they have more money than any of these other institutions. So I don't think we can discount the effect of money on providing quality education for students. So in closing, I am a person who feels that the Kansas City, Missouri School District's desegregation program did have some positive benefits for the students. Unfortunately, we don't get to read about the young woman who had the privilege to have an interview with Mrs. Clinton, or many of the other experiences that the students had.